Okay, so welcome to the Node.js Build workgroup meeting for February 19th, 2019. We have our standard agenda as outlined in the issue. So we'll just go through that. And so I guess to start out with, does anybody have any announcements?
Yes, I'll just repeat what I said in private there. That Mac Stadium has renewed their sponsorship of the Build working group. So they're obviously happy enough with the arrangement that we have with them. We do a little bit of promotion for them just to let people know we're using them. And so they've renewed the sponsorship for another 12 months. So the 28th of February is when it comes up again for review. So that's really good because that's got some really good infrastructure from them for all of our Mac testing and building. So.
Yeah, that's definitely the most flexible and sort of most capable Mac infrastructure we have in terms of, machines and flexibility and management and all that. So that is really good news.
Yeah, that's all.
Any other announcements?
So the Node.dev domain is supposed to go live officially today, but I'm getting certificate errors. So it's there, but it's
okay.
Not sure what's there. Or we talked about it in the last meeting. The new website redesign prototype.
Yep.
They want to. Eventually, I'm assuming they will want to hand this over to us. So we're keeping the channels of communications open.
Okay,
that's good to know.
In the last meeting, we were after clarification about the discussion. Was that discussion about the Google infrastructure for the website? Was that just about Node.dev, or was it at Node.js.org for the new site?
So initially, I think they're prototyping the new site with this .dev domain. So it's like the offer that we got from Google is to host the new site on their infrastructure. For now, it's ramping up through this prototyping phase, and we'll need we still need to formalize everything before we make this like the new site, that Node.org with their infrastructure.
Right. I mean, I think the focus on this launch was on a smaller prototype. I think there is interest in using it to prove out the work they're doing on the new website as well. And if that ends up being positive, I think then, at some point they'll say, hey, we've taken it to a certain extent. We think this looks good for the new website. How do we, what's the transition path from the website we have now to that? But I guess, my perception is it's still early sort of days, right? Like nobody is committed to that particular infrastructure. It's more of a, let's proof it out, use it as a place to prove out the concepts and move the new website forward. And then when it gets to a certain stage, we would need to have a more formal relationship with the Build working group to figure out how it's going to, be maintained going forward.
Yeah, that's my impression as well.
Did that answer your question, Rod, or?
Yeah, that's fine. I guess that as long as they know to loop us in when they need help, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of one of those things where we don't have a ton of time, and so I don't think it's like we can jump in and be super active until they vetted it. And once they vetted it, then yeah, we better make sure there's a good amount of time for a handover and transfer and whatever. And I guess, Raphael, are you sort of keeping in the loop? Are you in the loop at all, or just sort of watching?
A little bit.
Okay, so you're at least keeping an eye on what's going on and have a bit of an idea. If it gets to the point where you think it makes sense to bring something back to the, one of these meetings or something to bring up the rest of the group, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, any other announcements? No, okay. So I think we only have 2 issues actually on the agenda. We might take a look at the tracker just to touch on a few others if we get through these quickly. The first one is request for elevated permission. I don't know, Rod, if you have anything new on that front.
Nothing new on that one, and nothing new on the other one, I think.
Okay, and use foundation, right? So because that one, just remind me what the next step on the use foundation resources to support build was. The next step was,
so that just turned into a let's itemize the things that we do, and so there was this idea that Rich and I would spend some time looking at that. I think that's what we decided to do.
right?
Do a little sprint of really cataloging it so that we see what we're doing, what resources we're using, not just the sponsorship stuff, but people time.
Right.
I think that's becoming more urgent, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say it would be. It's one of those things. Like if we never have time to get to that, maybe we could get somebody to help us with that, right? Or
yeah. I mean, I have look. To be honest, I just haven't spent much time on Node in the past couple of months. I've just been too distracted with other things.
right.
It just hasn't had enough time on my bandwidth. I did do. I don't know if we want to move on, but I did spend a bunch of time on the Raspberry Pis. There's an issue in there that Raphael made, and maybe that's one we could discuss as well.
Yeah, maybe one last question on this one. So you said you haven't had time. Is that likely to change, or like that's?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's still up in the air whether I really have that much bandwidth to continue. And at some point I need to be, I guess, honest about how much I can contribute. Like I'm not, it's not like I'm not around, so I'm always up for dealing with emergencies and things that break, and whenever somebody calls me in, I can do that.
I didn't want to ask in general. I just meant like on this issue, do we just, does it make sense to wait, or is it like, well, we're just never going to get to it, so we could.
So both of these are they're long-standing to-dos for me. They really should be top priority to get them done. Pretty important because a lot of it is about stuff that these are things that are the kinds of things that are mostly in people's heads, mainly my head, and we need to get them out anyway.
Mm-hmm.
What we do, where things sit, who owns what permissions, all those sort of things they're not well laid out. And for the sake of the health of this group, getting those things out is pretty important.
I mean, just brainstorming, would it make sense to try and like set a 2-hour slot or something? Like, I'm just thinking of different ways to sort of say, okay, let's get a bunch of people together and try and make progress or something like that.
Maybe what we should do is turn next meeting into a sprint to make some progress as a group.
Yeah, that would be like, let's just say the subject for next meeting is to tease out the elevated permissions or to list the resources and see if we can do that. Or we could set another, we could set a time. I can't remember if we do it every 2 or 3 weeks now. I think it might be 3 weeks.
Just looking in the calendar. Yeah, 3 weeks. So March 13th, and that's actually a better time for me anyway. So that might be good to extend that one out and just do a focus on resources and permissions.
Right. So okay. So let's
resources, responsibility. Sorry, resources for the build working group, responsibilities that we have, and permissions for all of those things.
Okay, so we'll set that as the next one. I'm trying to think. I have something in around there, but hopefully I'm back for that date. And anyway, you could do it without me. So
it would be good to have Rich on that one, and
yep.
and Raphael as well. But if at least the four
March
of us,
13th meeting we're talking about.
We're talking about next build work group meeting to make it basically focus.
No, I know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
I know we're talking about the date, March 13th. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, so let's make that our plan to hopefully make some progress on those, and then we can go from there.
Excellent chance I won't be around that day, but we'll see.
Okay. Or does it make sense to does it make sense to try and find a different time, or just still target that? And
I mean, I can do whatever ahead of the meeting.
No, let's not try and find trying to find meeting times is always just a nightmare.
Okay, we'll do that, and we'll just make that will be our sole agenda. So what was the next issue you wanted to talk about?
Raspberry Pis. Raphael opened an issue last week about whether we want to phase them out. I'm just putting this thing in my calendar. So the Raspberry Pis, we've had issues with availability of them, but also they're taking longer and longer as the test suite grows.
And we're talking about Raspberry Pi 1s or just in general?
One's
right.
The focus here because the others seem to be handling okay. One really is the bottleneck.
Literally waiting on a single Raspberry Pi 1 right now as this meeting is happening. Go ahead.
There you go. So I can when they drop off, I can fix them up and all that sort of stuff. There does seem to be at least a couple that I'm suspicious of because there's certain one, like I recognize them by number and name, and there's a couple that just keep on coming back up, and even when I replace the SD cards, and so that makes me suspicious about their hardware integrity. And so we've got 14 of them. 2 of them are reserved for builds, so they're in release. That will eventually change when we stop doing, because we're doing cross compile now for newer releases. So when we phase out one of them, I don't know if did we do that in 8? Maybe we're doing that in 8 already, so maybe we don't even need them. 6, so we're at least doing them for 6. And then they could go back in the pool when we're only using cross compiler for release builds. So we've got 12 in the pool. We do parallelization of, I think it's 7.
I think it's 6.
6? If it's 6, that means if they're all online, then we can, in theory, do 2 jobs at the same time. They're not always all online. There's often one knocked out for whatever reason. So we have when there's more than one job in the queue, we do have slowdown. But even when there's only one job, they are on average taking around 42 minutes to complete the whole test suite. And even if we were to increase parallelization, because we did talk about this the other day, so if we cranked it up to say 10, parallelize across 10, there's still the initial cost of the checkout and setup of the file system. That's quite a cost for these machines. So it would speed it up a little bit, but it's really diminishing returns for greater parallelization because of that cost. But the test suite is getting bigger and taking longer. So we're faced with here, do we want to think about retiring them? Do we want to think about doing something more creative with the test suite, maybe paring it down for these slow machines? Because this is not just a problem for Raspberry Pi either. This is going to be more and more of a problem across all our hardware as the test suite increases. And it is growing quite fast because of the encouragement for coverage, and every new feature needs multiple tests. Yeah. Do we want to consider looking at emulation, or do we want to just phase them out? And if we phase them out, we'll have no coverage of v6. And do we want to phase out v6?
So V6, you mean Node 6 or ARM 6, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything beside the Raspberry Pi 1s where people still use ARM 6s?
So that's a good question that I don't have an answer to.
Okay.
I can't think off the top of my head, but for all I know, there's like BeagleBones and those kinds of things that people are using. I just don't know. We've tried so hard to get information about how people are using Node,
right?
And it's just not available. I did put a chart in my last comment on the issue, which is number 1677 in Build, and it's got percentages of the different architectures, and v6 is at 0.08% of total downloads, in comparison to v7, which is 0.219%.
What does that end up being in terms of absolute numbers?
I don't have that available. I could.
Just curious, like, it's a big difference whether that's like 5 or 5,000, right? Even if it's a small percentage.
Yeah, I mean, this. I commented there. I just don't know how to interpret that, because you can that's more. That's still more than ARM64, which I'm still surprised at. ARM64 just hasn't been as successful as ARM was hoping for server stuff. And even ARM64 is even greater than the IBM platforms. So and then you compare it to x86, 32-bit builds, where that's at 1.7%. So they're all significantly lower than 32-bit builds. What I haven't done is a breakdown of versions, because maybe it would be interesting to see how much this is used on Node 10, for instance.
Right. I mean, the other thing too is like download numbers don't necessarily reflect usage. They're just one of the proxies we have. Like, so if you're actually taking Node and embedding it in your your ARM6 hardware, you probably download it once for, all of your things.
Right. And some platforms are more likely to have use by package managers. So this is really difficult to interpret.
For what it's worth, and they probably can't provide much help, but the hardware team, working group, whatever it is, has recently been resuscitated, as Michael knows.
Yep.
And I don't know if there's any insight that those folks might have as to, if these sorts of things are being used much or not with Node. But someone on there might have some weird insight that we don't.
Yeah, I certainly know, like, I'm not going to remember the GitHub handle either, but the on the Node serial port front, they've certainly had some sort of ideas in terms of usage in the embedded space.
Okay, absolute numbers. So ARM v7 is let's pick the 18th of February. ARM v7 is 2,300 downloads. ARM v6 is 1,000 downloads.
For one day.
For one day. And ARM64 is 700.
Yeah.
But x86 is 30,000.
Sure.
And
but like
64 is 780,000.
I mean, for x86, anybody doing development,
Yeah, see, when I read x86, I think old versions of Node, because I did an analysis recently of the download usage, and Node version 0.10 is basically at a static point now. It's not even decreasing.
Right.
And so we've got these sticky versions that they're obviously locked in, whether it be for testing or production, whatever it is, it's locked in. And I mean,
for production, though, they shouldn't be downloading it repeatedly, right? Like, test makes some sense to me, but your production, I don't see why you'd be downloading
Well, if you've got dynamic hardware provisioning, it might be part of your provisioning script for, scaling up and down. You might not be.
I suppose.
I can imagine situations, but I suspect a lot of it is just things like CI systems that, like Travis, that just people have locked it in and it's not going anywhere until they.
Yeah, they've set their modules. They want their modules to support a broad set, so it just tests across the whole thing.
I don't know if that applies at all to ARM. So these numbers are, they're fairly stable.
It seems less likely for me for ARM, right? Like,
yeah,
you're maybe for test. But even then,
pulling it down and installing it is not like it's an investment to.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not people's desktops. Like, x86, you could see a good portion is just like every developer is sucking down a new version to test things out. Or
yeah, another strike against dropping support for ARMv6 is that it's really hard to compile it yourself for ARMv6. Cross compiling is annoying, like really annoying. Getting it right for because there's so many variants of ARMv6. You've got to get just the right instruction set and supported flags.
Right.
For x86, you can say, look, we don't support any more upstream in builds, but you can build it yourself pretty easily.
Right.
For ARMv6, it's like, I don't really have 2 days to wait for my thing to finish compiling.
Do we cross compile it still?
We do now on the newer versions, yeah.
So, okay, so actually to build the binaries, we don't even need the hardware.
No, but we shouldn't be building binaries that we don't test.
Right. No, I agreed.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's not as ARM as an ARM. It's not generic ARM6. It's pretty much Raspberry Pi 1 or binary.
It is, but I have not. They've got pretty broad support the way they're compiled, and I've not heard of them not working on another ARMv6 that somebody's tried. I've not seen a report for that.
A similar question.
Sun OS ones, like people constantly complain, hey, this is not generic Sun OS stuff. This is not Solaris. This is Smart OS. We haven't had anything like that.
Right. Similarly, I'm not saying we'd want to do this, but like, have we seen anything that have failed on ARM6 but not ARM7?
I was looking at the logs, and the easy answer is no.
Because I just wonder, like, it sounds like, if we cross compile in our release/build, it's not as big an issue. So our real issue is the testing on the regular regression tests, right?
I think if we would see anything, it would either come from V8 or from libv. I don't think that anything in our code base has that, can hit exactly the difference between ARMv6 and ARMv7. From my memory and from my perusal of the logs, I haven't seen that. Something that failed. A code that inserted a bug, a stable bug, not a flake, for V6.
I think we might have had something with OpenSSL as well.
OpenSSL had the ARM64 issues. That I remember.
That was recent, but we have in the past bumped into things with V6 with OpenSSL, I think, but that was a long time ago.
Because they have assembly optimization, right?
On V8, is V8 even testing it anymore, or have they dropped it? I wouldn't be surprised.
I think they do, because they're making they're making a lot of noise about dropping MIPS, which they're gonna drop next month. So there's
dropping which ARM6?
No, MIPS.
MIPS, yeah.
So as far as I know, everything that they announce is supported, they do test.
And they have ARM6 support still?
Yeah, they have ARM6
Yeah.
support. Well, otherwise we couldn't have, because there are a lot of V8 now is assembly or
Right, yeah.
generated by Torque. So there is on a bit of a tangent. There is a community-driven effort, which eventually will probably be me, helped by the Internet Archive, to create a community build of Node for Linux x86, like a binary that doesn't have that is not blessed. There they have this project. They want to have it embedded, and they have a bunch of hardware that they needed.
For 30, so sorry, x86.
Yeah, for 32-bit.
32-bit, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you know, if we could do a similar route that we went with 32-bit Linux. We could say we're downgrading it to experimental. We're not gonna break it. If somebody in the community wants to pick up and create, community distribution, we'll help them set that up. It's just a pain point for us. That's one option. The other option is test calling. We can just reduce the test coverage and alleviate the pressure specifically for the Pi ones, because currently they are the bottleneck.
How close is the next bottleneck after ARMv6? And
Sorry?
What is that? What's the next bottleneck if we knocked out ARMv6?
I'm not really sure, because we optimized the IX away, I optimized Windows away, and things are. And I have another optimization of Windows in the pipeline, so I'm not really sure what's the next one.
I think it's also the Pi ones is how much work does it take for you to keep them going?
Yeah, it's not too much, but since we're running at 12 with a parallelization of 6, taking one out reduces capacity significantly.
Like, how does that compare to what we have for the Pi, the ARM7 versions?
I think they're all online at the moment, and we've got the same number of we've got more, 13 v7s. So that's Pi 2s.
Yeah.
And then for the Pi 3s, we've got 11, but they don't have any trouble anyway.
Sorry, they don't have what?
They don't have any trouble with speed. They're
right.
Pretty quick. So they haven't been a problem. Another option is to chuck a couple more in there, but I don't know. It seems like if we have a strategy to do something with the size of the test suite, that might be nice. Is there any easy path to coming up with a reduced set?
There are
quick verification.
There are a few low-hanging fruits. There is a set of tests which I've collected from the debug builds, which are just slow, and their impact on the total coverage is less than 1%. So we run them only once a day. And it's a nice, I think it was in total time, it was like something like 15% of total test time is in that list, which for now is just skipped on the debug. The other thing that we could do is, find, like, for instance, today I saw that we're testing our own tooling, like our own patches to ESLint, stuff like that, we could also move to running only once a day. It's also not totally significant for the coverage. And anyway, we could do something. We could do something, stochastic. Like say, if the load on the Raspberry Pi hits a certain threshold, then we start dropping tests, and then when the load subsides, we check master and see if like anything rotted. For now, with the suits that we moved into this strategy, it hasn't been horrible. Rich might, I don't know, also has an opinion about that. Like we moved all the internet tests, all the pummel tests, and all the benchmark tests, we moved to testing only once a day, and slow debug build.
Yeah, I don't know that I really have anything to add to that.
Yeah. So if we could, we could maybe run the sanity test on master twice a day, and decide to just stochastically drop tests from I don't know, the Pi 1 or the Pi 1 as a placeholder for any other platform that becomes a real bottleneck for the CI.
It'd be great to have data on which tests break on what platforms, how often, so that we could say the most reliable tests that never break. Or hardly
ever. It could do that.
We just don't collect that information.
Yeah, there's certainly some which are far less likely to have platform variation.
Yeah, there's also it's a long running project that I've worked with Venco about mapping our coverage to the tests and see if we could create like a smart list of which tests should be mapped to a certain change set. If somebody changes a certain file, which are the tests that are probable to cover it? And so we could have more focused regression tests for the PRs, which again, like my assumption is that we want to have no test PR. My dream is to have it finish in less than 2 hours. My dream is to have it less than 30 minutes. Yeah. So we could go with this like smart like guided missile testing.
Yeah, I know that. I'd be interesting to see what progress you've made on that, because that's kind of the holy grail, which I've heard several people try in different contexts, and it's a hard problem.
But there are.
So let's just there's more costs here. So this is not just about landing PRs. The more tests we have to run, and the slower things are, the longer each release takes. So when we have these batches of releases, like security releases, and we need to queue up all these tests, if they're each taking an hour just to run basic tests, then you've got to add Sitcom on top of it. Releases become more and more costly and difficult and frustrating, and prone to prone to infrastructure problems that exacerbate things. So the further we go down this without having a proper solution, or maybe biting the bullet and saying we're dropping support, the more we are locking in those costs. So if we, for instance, just leave ARMv6 for Node version 12, then that's 3 years of test runs that are at least 40 minutes, unless we have some other creative solution in the meantime. And that's test runs for releases. Oh, and then the additional cost for releases is because we are, I guess, caching is not going to be a big concern here, but anyway, we're locking those costs in for 3 years. So we've got to be really, really careful about that. And maybe we do need to rationalize and say it's time to cut bait and run. And I wonder if we could put out, maybe Twitter is the best place to do this. Get Node.js to put out a tweet asking for feedback. If, like we did for x86, I think we did a similar thing. If we dropped ARMv6 in brackets Raspberry Pi 1,
yep.
Would it affect you and how? We'd like to hear, because we just don't have any connection to anyone that's using it.
Yeah, I think we might also reach out to the Raspberry Pi Foundation. They're like very interested, at least from the promotional side, in using Node.js as an application for Raspberry Pi. Like what is I was looking very hard this week about the release lifecycle of their hardware. They're talking about the Raspberry Pi 4. Are they planning on sundowning Raspberry Pi 1? It's very unclear. They are unclear about that.
Yeah, they're still manufacturing and selling. So people, because the pattern is that people have locked in on building things based on these hardware platforms, and they're relying on them. So they're still shipping them.
Yeah, I know, but there is a gray area there. They're not selling them directly now. They're only selling them through their resellers. So maybe they're not manufacturing. They're only selling stock. So or at least get like an official statement from them. If you want to keep support for this platform forever, I'm sure they had this conversation with Debian or with Raspbian.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole, downstream consumers that need to know what are their plans.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, in anything we put out, we should ask for help, right? Because what we don't really have is anybody involved representing like users or the businesses who ship on Raspberry Pi 1 or anything like that, right?
We've tried for so long to get that, though. So here's another thing. A problem for them is that Raspbian is currently built for ARMv6. So even though it runs on v7 and 64, it's built for their lowest common denominator. So they're still supporting it in Raspbian. I bet they'd love to get off that because they're cross-compiling things all the way down. That's pretty suboptimal. I haven't heard any rumblings of them.
I've heard rumbling from Debian. Debian wants to drop ARMv6 support.
But has Debian ever had ARMv6 support? They haven't. They're only shipping.
I think like most of the Raspbian was upstream at some level. So
Raspbian builds everything themselves.
Yeah.
For ARMv6, because Debian only builds ARMv7.
So there is some. I've read on threads, on recent threads. There is a little bit of friction there, maybe.
So Raphael, I don't know if you're inclined to do this, but if you want to reach out and have some discussions, that'd be great. I did try. I have had brief discussions with the Raspberry Pi Foundation in the past. I haven't found them very amenable to any sort of relationship.
I'll try again. Nothing to.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I just wonder if we should, it's kind of like, will we get the most reaction if you say something like, hey, we're considering dropping support for ARM6 and Node 12? Let us know if that's going to be an issue.
I'm thinking that's the only way to get feedback. Actually,
Right.
the only way to get feedback is to drop support, and then 6 months later, somebody will say, "Oh, I need it."
Sorry. Let's rename your issue, Raphael, 1677, and say, it says consider retiring the Pi 1s. And how about we edit that and say Pi 1s / ARM v6, and then ask for feedback on that specific issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can ask like the Node account to tweet that out, and if I don't know if we have other better ways like a Medium article, or we can think of any other ways to try and get the message out there.
We need to infiltrate the online communities. There are forums and people who are in the loop, people who port stuff to those platforms. If we can get, I'll try to get the message there. I think it would be better than a general RFC, which usually just goes to web developers. Less of the audience we're looking for.
Yeah, we really want larger users, right? Like I have a Pi 1 at home. I'd like to be able to continue to run Node, but that's not a good reason to have it keep being there, right?
Yeah, I have a MIPS processor that I would like. Well, I could always run Node 8. Node 8.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
like I said,
Rod mentions about people continuing to ship things. I wonder if in that case they actually upgrade anyway.
Like the people who port Node to MIPS didn't do it for Node 10. So that they're keeping Node 8 very current, but Node 10 was never ported, even though V8 supports it. Like the filing down, doing the yak shading, nobody did that. So
right. Yeah, I only heard last week that MIPS was potentially going away, but
yeah, they're doing it quite fast. They lost the company who was maintaining that code just announced that they're dropping, and V8 said, okay, next major will drop it.
Yeah.
So I'll try to reach out to the people who actually play with hardware and see what they're saying. I'm assuming somewhere people do CI on this scale. If they're interested of taking over that part of the that downstream from us.
Right. Or taking over or coming in and helping here even might be good, right?
Yeah.
That's the most solid sign of need in my mind, right? If people are actually saying, no, this is important enough, we're going to come and help.
Yeah, although there's a ton of politics and
I know it's way harder than that, but if somebody shows up, that's a solid, solid indicator, right?
Definitely. Okay, so we have an action item on that.
Okay, that was a good discussion. I'm wondering, is there any other issues? We got about 9 minutes that we should. I mean, I just opened an issue about additional OSX machines. I think that's just an execution thing. They're at near form. We just need to work through the steps.
So we want to put 1014 on that?
Well, I think that's what we need to figure out. Which versions can we get and which ones do we want to install on them?
As far as I remember, that Mac Stadium VMware doesn't have 10.14 support yet.
Okay, so it would have to be earlier than that. I think the same was Mac Stadium. We didn't have 10.14 images yet.
So,
I think that was a separate issue. That other issue was we want to get newer versions of OS X in place. This is just getting more hardware diversity in there.
okay.
Adding Python 3 to more build machines, is there?
So Christian is just pushing hard on that, but the bigger bottleneck is actually getting our build to be Python 3 compatible. I've hit that milestone this week. I was able to build Build with Python 3. Once we get that landed in Node Core, we should start testing it on more platforms. It's easier to have Python side by side. Python 3 was designed with side-by-side compatibility. So it shouldn't be a major issue. And then we need to decide if we want to keep, for the remaining 10 months of the year, do we want to keep testing on both? Python 2 and Python 3. That's
right. I guess, is that something that we should switch on a Semver major? Like, should it be for a particular version of Node that switches over?
So I'm sure all the release channels would be very happy if we do that on a Semver major. It hasn't come to discussion yet because we were Python 3 incompatible.
Right. Yep.
Once we are, we could say Node 12 will be Python 3, Python 2 will be experimental, because at the end of the year, it's going to go anyway. And we have end of life escape hatch. Right.
Now, I mean, 12 is only a couple months away. So getting 12 onto Python 3 onto all the machines and testing everything isn't necessarily going to be easy, right?
I'm not sure. It's going to be way easier, than compiler or
okay. Well, that's probably true. Yeah. Well,
whatever. And we need to target for the release. We need to target. We don't need every variant of Linux out there. We need a variant that we're releasing on. So it's about 10 machines. So I think it's tractable.
Yeah, I guess you mean 10 machines total, or 10 like the
10 platforms,
10 platforms. Yeah, okay.
Ansible scripts, and then 10 machines.
Okay. I mean, I brought this one up just to make sure. It sounds like this is not the blocker yet, but maybe the next step. If you've actually got it to build with Python 3, then we need to start rolling it out to the other platforms.
Definitely. So hopefully by next meeting,
okay,
that should be that should come on the agenda.
Because I don't know, Rod, what do you think about, like, if we said for Node 12 it's Python 3? Is that a concern for people migrating, or?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so that would be
to be honest, I don't care that much about it. I think that makes sense, and that would get rid of a bit of our headache. So.
Right. Okay.
There's platforms that have complications, but in terms of impacting users, unless you're compiling Node, it only impacts you through Node.js, and Node.js can have smarts built into it to manage that better, and it already has. So
yeah.
Right. So yeah, for modules and stuff, I guess the question: are there going to be modules out there that don't compile because it's
for Node.js, we're gonna have to keep support unless we finally make, we release Node.js 4. But as far as I can see, even if we get to Python 3 compatibility, we're not going to lose Python 2 compatibility anytime.
Right. Okay. So it wouldn't be turned off. And so, yeah, if your modules, if you have Python 2 and you've been building your modules, it'll just continue to work.
Yeah, it will continue to work. And we're covering that with the Node.js CI anyway. We're testing, we're building modules and testing the code with Node 4 and with Visual Studio.
Right.
2013, which was end of life.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's probably our time for today. Any last issues before we call it a day? Okay. So I'll send out the minutes, and we'll call out that next meeting is going to be a focus on the two things that we talked about, unless there's anything that's urgent, and we'll get back together then.
Great.
If you could all add yourself to the minutes, I'm going to paste it in the chat. That would be great.
Okay.
Oops, come on. Just because it'll probably take you a minute versus me. Okay, guess we'll talk to everybody later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, Michael. Bye.